Greetings, everyone. Welcome to Terra Prime Saber Academy. So, here we are, at least 7 weeks down the road. And we have kind of gone through the basic layout of our system, as far as it coincides with the 7 forms. So we've gone through our 4 pillars, which are our foundation. Right, our Shicho, Kashi, Soresu, Ataru. We've gone through our combination, synthesis, creative stage in Form 5. Come to our harmonization, or our kind of fine-tuning of there in Form 6. And now we are here at Form 7, the big kahuna, as it were. Lots of people like to talk about it and everything like that. Juyo and Vapad, or however you want to pronounce it, the 7th form of lightsaber, as it is described in canon. In our system, it represents the principle of transcendence. So we're taking what we know before, and we are trying to make it equal more than the sum of its parts. And that directly relates to things like strategy and other things that are kind of inherent in a live situation, as it were. As always, go ahead and questions, comments, and stuff in the live chat. If you're happening upon this after the fact, go ahead and throw them in the comments. We'll see if we can get to them maybe in a future video or such like that. So anywho, Juyo, Babad. We'll just call it Juyo for simplicity's sake. The canon description of it is, and I don't actually have my book here with me, but the basic idea of Form 7 is that we are now using our emotions, and in the case of Juyo and Sith, using anger and all of that kind of thing to aid us in fighting and stuff like that. So when we are approaching these things from a realistic and reality standpoint, to the point where we are going to take an actual thing, right, our LED lightsabers, and actually try to do something to somebody else who's not cooperating with us, you run into a little bit of a problem. Now, this has happened before in the forms, right? So Ataru, the descriptions of it sometimes are a little skewed. Soresu being 100% defensive, that's impossible, you can't do it. Well, I mean, you can, but you will eventually run out of space. But here we have a little bit of an issue that goes beyond here. And this is why we haven't done any tutorials or anything like that, other than that one little foray into a form. And as I said with Niman and with Form 6, forms take on a different meaning after Form 5, right? Or even during Form 5. So they're not going to occupy the same space, and what we do with them is a little bit different. This is also why we keep it for higher levels, because this is a level of of thinking that should probably not be approached by people who are still working on technique, still working on getting the basics and the basics and the intermediate material down there first. And again, harmonization should come first, right? We're looking to adapt to and match what's coming. When we get here, we have the canon description of using anger, using emotion, using that kind of thing. And the problem with that is that is universally a bad thing for you to do when you are in a fight, in a physical confrontation, a sword fight, a boxing match, whatever, right? If you lose your cool, if you give in to your anger and give into your fear and give into all of that kind of stuff, while it may feel somewhat like you're getting stronger, you're getting more powerful, you're doing better at things, you are most assuredly not. It can be demonstrated time and time again that you are less aware of your surroundings, you're less cognitively in control when you're angry. You can't think as creatively, you can't think as freely. All of that, So all of your faculties, all of those things that you've been depending on up to, this point, you have to realize that it's all to avoid that, right? You can't go. Now, narratively speaking, in a story, it's an interesting thing for the characters to have, right? A technique which requires you to do the one thing that you're trained not to do, right? Yeah, that works in a story. It's neat. Like I said, narratively, it gives us a lot of stuff, but you can't do that in real life. For a whole slew of reasons. The number one fact is that you are not better when you are angry or hyped up like that. You are, in fact, less in every category. And that's where we'll get to that kind of thing. But then we're not going to encourage people to get angry, to take things personally, to do these types of things. People make fun of Kylo Ren, and to an extent, it's valid, but that is what his tantrums. That is what giving into your dark side, or giving into the anger and all that kind of stuff looks like. People. It's not that you become, like Super Mario after eating the star. You're just flailing around like a child. So we want to avoid that at all costs. However, knowing that fact and understanding that fact and being able to see that in another person is really where we're going to go with that. So it's not so much that we give into anger, fear, and anything like that, but we use anger, fear, and all of that against the opponent by making them feel those things, so that they will lose control, so that they will be not able to respond appropriately. So you're dealing a lot with issues of deception and other things. Harassment uh, there is the concept in canon of Dunmak, um, which is taunting and the verbal kind of stuff, and we kind of expand that to mean all of these little things that you can do to harass your opponent into making a mistake. And that's really the base level of application there, where in an encounter, I can't get through somebody's defenses, right? They may legitimately have more skill than I do. How can I even the playing field? And one of the ways that I can even the playing field is by eliciting an emotional response out of my opponent. Now, this is taken to an enormous, to a fictional effect in, say, professional wrestling and WWE, that kind of thing, but the trash talking and all of that's fairly common. Now, generally speaking, in sporting events, that kind of behavior is frowned upon. It will more than likely be frowned upon in ASL FFE rule set. However, I do not believe the issue has yet come up. I don't know if you have a lot of trash talk in the arena there. I know we tend not to hear everybody's just kind of giddy with excitement to be playing with sabers and all of that. So there you go. So those are the issues. The issues are, right, anger is bad to you, right? If you're angry, you are at a disadvantage, period. So the methods of Juyo and all of that will be in service of that kind of thing. Now, that leaves us again with another impasse for this particular format, because what can I show and what can I have you do that will kind of like bring this into focus and like that without having you go through all this? Because these concepts and this ability to do that kind of thing within a live confrontation, that takes time, and that takes a lot of practice and dedication of getting your kind of situational awareness kind of honed to a certain thing. So if we think of 6 and 7 as being adjuncts of each other, right? You have the harmonization aspect of it, where we're trying to meld with the environment, meld with the situation, be as non-confrontational to everything as possible. Just be able to kind of slip in there and go through that. The diplomat's form, right? This is taking the opposite effect. So we're taking all of that stuff that we've learned in our Form 6, and we're now going to weaponize it. And we're now going to say, okay, so this is how I got in tune with this particular situation. These were the obstacles to me becoming in tune with this particular situation, and therefore these are the elements that I can try to reproduce for my opponent that will prevent them from necessarily achieving that particular realization or what have you. And then that's how we can kind of continue on. What we learn from trying to go with everybody teaches us how we can then circumvent them, how we can than mitigate or sabotage, depending on what your point of view is. Those particular things that we do not want to happen. In the case of a saber fight, we do not want to lose the point or what have you. So, okay, so that's kind of where we're coming from with this idea. And that goes a lot to how people kind of imagine Juyo and all of this to be. Like some crazy, out of control Tasmanian devil type of thing. And it doesn't necessarily have to be that. There are methods of stepping and of doing other things that can cause confusion. There are tactics that you can do that can kind of skew things in your favor. But there's also stuff that we've done from the beginning that can that really embody this principle. So we'll kind of get into those. And it just goes to show you that you do this to a tiny little extent from the beginning, right? We all kind of want to do this because you can't necessarily do everything you want to do. So there's all that kind of thing. It would be akin to, let's say, if we're in the sport of tennis, and there's a person who, as we say in tennis, is a wall. Everything just bounces right or back off, right? They're not doing anything fancy, right? They're just keeping the ball in play, and no matter what you do, you can't, get it around them. That tactic of just responding in kind to stalemate over and over and over and over and over again, right? Wearing the other person down. You can kind of see that as a kind of Ceresu-ish type of thing, and a lot of people think about Ceresu in those terms. But if you were to do that in kind of like a fight, that's a very dangerous thing to do. So you would have to have a very high level of skill, or at least a good gap from your opponent, in order to have the freedom to control the thing like that. But the act of coming back to stalemate and never going through there can be frustrating for some people, right? If you are a very strategic person, you're a very strategic fighter, you will often be waiting for somebody to initiate the exchange, right? So that you can then respond, and all of that. If the other person is not going to feed you that can be disturbing in and of itself. Now, what separates these things, right? How is it Form 7? How is it Form 3? Where this comes in. And it just comes from how you are kind of like applying it and thinking about it, right? It would be almost impossible. I mean, you can't say that, but it's not a viable strategy for a beginner or even somebody who's kind of like intermediate to attempt this type of thing. Because oftentimes, the more experienced individual who is more skilled in all of these things has heard these things before, has methods in and of themselves to combat that particular response, right? As I said, everything up to this point has been trying to get us to avoid that emotional knee-jerk response. Now, as we're interpreting it, into that kind of stuff, we come up with the whole that. So emotionally engaging your opponent, right, strategically is difficult to do. And there are better ways to kind of go about that. Again, like I said, I do not expect anybody who is just starting out this to even remotely understand some of these concepts, because these are concepts which resist explanation and sort of require experience. You have to kind of go through it, because there's a visceral aspect to it where we can talk, right, and we can say, oh yeah, well, this can happen, and this can happen, and this can happen, but the reality of the situation is it might not happen that way. So you have to use all of these other skills here, right? So if you don't have the ability to adapt, hence Form 6, at will to anything that happens, you would be very foolish to attempt some manner of this, of provoking your opponent, especially if you perceive them as having more skill than you, right? Like I've said this, and I don't remember if I said this in this class or in one of my others, but there's this range of ability of which most of us fit in between these two lines, right? Whereas, so in that setting, these contests can go either way, right? Now you have people who are rank beginners here that have to get up to the experience level to be competent in here. But once you're competent in here, so much is left up to chance, so much is left up to day-by-day things, right? Let's say you have somebody who's just started, been sparring for maybe 2 months, right? And they arrive and they meet a person who's been sparring for 3 years. Okay? The person who's been sparring for 3 years has much more experience in that particular arena. The other person's a little green. Okay? So you have a kind of disparity there, right? But let's say that this person who's been doing it for 3 years is working on a particular skill, right? They're not happy with how this particular thing is working in their game. Therefore, they're going to start handicapping themselves in play to try to practice this particular thing. And that means essentially losing a whole lot. Therefore, in a dojo school type of setting, a beginner, a more experienced person, I shouldn't say beginner, but a person who has started sparring, right? I generally would recommend people train for, at the very least, 6 months before trying anything free, right? And even when you start doing it two-person, be very limited in what you do. I want to try this particular technique. Build up to it. Don't rush into the sparring and the fighting. But let's say somebody gets into fighting, all of that kind of thing. So now you have kind of an equal footing, right? So there's all kinds of things that can happen in there, right? For you to be able to control the variables in those situations to a certain extent, you have to be on top of your game, right? Like, you have to be in control of all of your faculties. You cannot be having an off day, right? You can't be saying, oh, my shoulder, I slept on it wrong, right? You got to be in tip-top shape. You got to be, thinking in that way, all the time. So there's not much of a use for people to come in, right? You've got this range here where the fight can kind of go either way. You can play with it in there because you don't have huge disparities, right? But again, if you want to control what happens in this, you need to be far enough away from the other person in skill that you can kind of dictate what that is. Now, the person working on their technique is sort of doing that. They're not doing that in order to beat the other opponent. They're dictating the rule, kind of manipulating the rules in the encounter to help themselves practice a particular technique. So, again, you have this what is there. Things at this level get very foggy, right? And they become almost intuitive, intuitive notions, at that point. Okay, so let's talk about a couple of things here. So, talking about harassment, right? One of the things that you can do, in this way is basically harassment. And that's throwing strikes not necessarily intended to hit them, right? But intending to get them to respond to something and to keep them from doing what they necessarily want to do, right? Now, let's say you're playing the ASL game, okay? So you're dealing with priority, and all of that kind of thing. You can't do this exactly like you could in other things where you can just continuously hit them, right? However, you can basically lob them softballs, right, over and over and over again, right, just so that they maybe get into a pattern. So if I'm coming over, right, to over here, in one, and I just keep hitting there, right, boom, 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 boom. I keep going for the same spot, right, and they keep parrying, and they keep parrying, and keep parrying, right? You can use that as, one of those things. Another thing is always varying these techniques. Not necessarily, again, trying to hit them, but trying to get them to react in different areas to, disturb them. Again, not something that I'm expecting a whole lot of people to be able to do at this level. If you want to, and again, it's a difficult thing to see. You're getting into sports psychology. You're getting into, these invisible things. But so we'll talk about kind of like the principles that kind of lead up to doing this, right? Not doing this in and of itself. So yes, we're talking about Juyo, but we're not going to actually show any of it because there's nothing of it really to show. It's something that you apply to other things that you will morph into. But, so, if we take the basic concepts of our previous forms, right? Here, our determination form, Shicho, the pushing forward, okay? There's your aggressiveness, right? Getting in there, right? Staying in there, going, right? Putting pressure on things. Okay. Makashi, right? We're threatening the opponent. We're keeping them at bay by keeping our sword arm out and our blade ahead of us, right? We're creating this cone, right? Okay. All of that has that, right? In some schools, this is, we call it threatening the opponent, right? We're constantly having the blade there between us and the opponent, right? I shouldn't say always. We're not constantly. You can't obviously. Okay. Suresu. We already talked about the Suresu thing, right? If you continue just kind of staying afloat, right, you can use that as a way to perturb and get your opponent to mess up. Right? The difference would be that you aggressively and without mercy capitalize on whatever opening presents itself. And then Ataru we have, that basic harassment idea, right, of constantly attacking to tire them out, keep them from doing what they want to do, keep them keep them on their toes, all of that. Right? When you move up to synthesis and you start dictating the kind of techniques and stuff like that, you can start bringing in all kinds of different deceptive techniques. Hand placement, okay? One, right, we do this kind of hand thing here, right? Or like that. These things can, change the dynamic in particular ways that may or may not give you an advantage. But the point is that you can start doing things, right, with purpose, with a purpose that goes beyond just this. So we talk about the second intention sometimes, right? This is basically moving your intention far back, right? Then maybe moving it right into forward, knowing that it's going to be a game of patience, right? Manipulating things while it is given a lot of euphemism, like it's forcing things in there. Really, what manipulation is the gentle caressing of things, right? To get them into things. It's not overt power, right? So this is one thing that would be different from our expression of it in the way that most people express Juyo and all of this, right? Is that you take the skills from before. If I cannot freely use all of my skills, right, as in Form 5, without thinking about it, without hesitating, all that stuff, I won't be able to harmonize with my environment. And if I can't harmonize with my environment, I cannot figure out how to perturb that environment. Right? I don't know what factors are there. Right? So you must go through these stages, right? The Sith that goes, no, that's wrong, okay? Let's look at Sidious. Sidious didn't do any of that stuff, right? If he did any of that stuff, it was behind closed doors to intimidate a single person, right? And it was usually when he had his hood on and all that kind of stuff. Otherwise, nobody knew he was there. He wasn't going out for fame. He wasn't going out for that. As Sidious, obviously, he was in Chancellor. But that's the point, is that the power, the true power, does not lie in overt strength, right? As much as all that kind of stuff goes. The overt power is the smart application of that strength, but even more so, the correct use of weakness in your own self by feigning weakness, right? If we talk about, here's a good concept from Form 5 that coordinates with Juyo, is rear guards. Okay, rear guards entreat attacks into certain areas because we put here and we go, here, look, I'm open over here, right? That's a very, very simple conversion. Okay, so there's a little overview. Let's see what we've got here on the live chat. Hello, everybody. Okay, so there are sportsman-like ways to push your opponent's emotion, avoid outwardly looking tired, always be at your opponent to the ready line after each set, make them feel that you are fresh, not they. I think I understand. I think I understand that. Not letting people, like, always looking, strong and fresh. Sometimes, yeah. Feigning weakness is a way better way to get ahead. I will tell you. I learned very, very long ago that it is a very good thing to invest in people underestimating you. And although that makes your ego take a little bit of a hit, right? In the long run, you're really in a better spot for it. Yes. So, forcing a technique through brute force equals coercion. Sending the conditions for black consent to a boss itself. Some applies to manipulation. Yeah, you can call it, the difference between coercion and manipulation. It's not necessarily strength that we're talking about as being bad, right? You need lots of strength. We're talking about the outward expression of it, right? Do you express yourself as being strong, right? Now, I'm not saying you do one way or the other. Now, this may be one of those dividing lines between Vapad and Juyo, right? And Juyo doesn't care. You just do it whenever you want. And with Vapad, you have to do it in ways that are ethical, right? But the strength, if you act strong, people will be defensive, right? So in self-defense, one of the things I teach people is when things are getting kind of out of hand and you want to calm them down, whatever, put up your hands like this, one lower than the other, right? So it's like a ready stance or whatever. Open up your hands and be like, whoa, 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 whoa. Be very defensive about it, right? Tuck your elbows in, take a very submissive stance, that kind of thing. Being able to, come down off of you, because it's very hard, and this is one of the things, if we give in to our emotion in that particular scenario, we then meet the other person's aggression, and they will try to overcome us, and then boom, 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 and now we've got a conventional fisticuffs, right? This is not supposed to be a conventional fight. This is not just supposed to be a fight. This is supposed to be the absolute control, and to an extent, an enjoyment of the conflict, right? So we want to be strong, but we don't want them to know how strong at any one time we are, right? We can use it to frighten people, but again, they get defensive. Maybe we don't want them defensive. Maybe they're strong too, right? And we're not sure if we can win in a test of strength. And there's where all of these things come. So it's easy to say, oh, I'm just going to freaking flip my top and go ballistic on them and be a berserker. Remember, berserkers were aided by alcohol. So they had, they drank, they were blitzed, right? So they literally didn't feel any pain. And that is one of the things that allowed people to, to kind of do that. And of course, probably the historical record is padded out with how often they were used and all that. But I'm not sure that there was a really hefty demand for a berserker retirement fund. If anything, they were burn the candle at two ends and hope it Hope it catches something on fire. Okay. So you said it may be looked down upon in sports to use manipulation, feign weakness, etc. What do you know of culture's views, such as Chinese culture on the field of battle to the death? I mean, obviously, look, when I say to use manipulation, in sports, you're constantly using manipulation, right? Like, let's take the game of tennis again. This is a game that I used to play. Right? You're constantly trying to manipulate the idea, or not the idea, the way the game plays, like either running them back and forth. What is their weak spot? Is there ground strokes? Is there movement? Is there volley? Whatever. And then you try to create scenarios in which you can exploit that particular weakness. If, however, you start calling them names or shouting when they're just about to hit the ball, right? Those types of manipulations are frowned upon, right? Regular sports kind of thing. And yeah, like in tennis, trash talking is not permitted on the court. There are very, very clear sets of etiquette, and John McEnroe was famous for completely ignoring them. So there you go. Okay, so what do I know of Chinese culture's view of battlefield or a duel to the death? Now, a duel to the death. A duel to the death is a duel to the death, right? It's like two guys are going to try to kill each other, and one of them will succeed. Maybe both of them will succeed. I don't know. So there's no rules in a duel to the death, in that sense. The on the field of battle, feigning weakness is a very common tactic, right? Where you only have a part of your force that is visible or is known to your opponent. You may even put out false information regarding it. You may feed, if you know you have a spy, you may feed that spy false information to get the opponent to make a mistake, right, and then get the jump on them. All of that kind of thing. So, on the battlefield, the duels to a death, anything really goes. In a formalized duel, like to first blood or in a judicial sense or something like that, that other stuff will probably be seen as ungentlemanly like, but it would probably also depend on the tradition. So I'm not sure there's a generalization that could be made there. Okay, let's see. Master Kenobi used trolling the opponent to great effect. Some of that can be seen there. Sun Tzu wrote a whole chapter on the power of deception. Again, it's a very common military tactic. Intelligence is one of the most important things to an army, and it's also the greatest weakness. If you can feed the enemy false information, they will make the wrong decisions, and you can capitalize on that. You can even create things that will do this. So that would be the battlefield expression of this, espionage and all that kind of thing. It wasn't just the alcohol. Druids had other things too. Not sure about the druids. Berserkers are a kind of a Norse thing, and they were famous for drinking a kind of meatish brew or something. I'm not exactly sure what it was made of, but legend has it. I'm not sure how true this is. I'll quickly look it up. Where we supposedly got our word for beer. But that is, of course, just a legend. It is from the Latin. So, there you go. Learn something new every day. Okay. Anyway, berserkers were meant to self-destruct on the field. Yeah, I don't know, particularly what tactical advantage they have other than mayhem, right? Just creating a whole lot of chaos. Now that is one method of confusing an opponent, right? Is to create chaos. In martial arts senses, one art that would specialize in that would be drunken style, where you feign being off balance, right? And the steps become very erratic and hard to predict if you don't know the pattern. And the pattern is difficult to see because it's so erratic. It doesn't fit some of the major categories for patterns in our brain, so we can't see it. And also with drunken style, they tend to get into very strange, odd physical positions, which can also cause confusion. You don't know exactly what's going on. That kind of thing. Unpredictability is a very powerful thing. However, we should make and I don't know if I mentioned again in this class or some other one. Let's talk about the idea that beginners are more dangerous than people who are very skilled, because of their unpredictability. This is true to a certain extent, but it is dependent on one factor which is very rarely talked about, and that is the other person has to be underestimating the other person, right? If a person is used to fighting beginners, novices, and stuff like that, like somebody who is a teacher, me or any of my colleagues who teach martial art or anything like that, we're very used to dialing our intensity level to a particular skill level, right? Either to teach them a lesson, right? Like, we want you're not doing this. Let's say, common way of doing it, somebody's not blocking their head, so they're not bringing their guard up to guard their head, right? And so without doing a whole lot of fancy stuff like that, you just continually just kind of tap them on the head until they get the idea and go, oh, right. And they come up there. And then once they get that first strike, they go, oh, hey, great. That's something I can do, right? Now, up to that point, they're doing a whole bunch of stuff that you have no idea what to do. And there's a lot of things that you can do to prevent that from getting the better of you. If you are knowledgeable and if you are practiced, you should have no problem dealing with somebody who has less skill or experience with you. Now, yes, there are people who are naturals and who just kind of take to the activity, whatever it is. But they're rare, right? Most of the time, if you just play things smart, right, and do that, the way that particular scenario breaks out is that the person who knows more is complacent, and they underestimate the person who is less experienced, they make some silly mistakes and they can lose, right? That being said, I don't know many experienced fighters that in a competition setting, if they underestimate a person, that underestimation would continue very far past the first point lost, right? I go into a match, I'm going up with somebody, and they're better than I thought they were going to be. I immediately, without hesitation, up my effort, right? That's just, I don't know anybody who would not do that. So take that for what it's worth. So I've got, can you talk about the lightsaber real battle scene in your neighborhood, please? That sounds like a bot. I don't know. If you're a real person, please clarify. That's all I can say. I'm not exactly understanding that. Okay. So yeah, this is the idea. Now, again, when you're dealing with like rule sets, you know, gaming the rule set or using the rule set to do something is a natural thing to do. Rule sets should make an effort to prevent that from happening, right? Or accept what people do. So I see a lot of people now holding their saber by the end because that's the rules of TSL. You can do that, and you get that extra reach and all that kind of stuff, right? You can't do that in ASL, so you wouldn't be able to get the advantages from that, right? But there you go. With the ASL rule set, you can use this stuff because you can use spins, you can use the arming principles to change the pace of the fight. So if things are going one thing, I can do something that I can either slow it down, I can speed it up a little bit, then slow it down. You can do things with engagement, with dodging, and of course feints are allowed. So there you go. Oh, okay. So I've been in the scene for, yes, asking because I've been in the scene for a long time, and I'd like to start a real lightsaber dueling group in my region. So make as realistic as much as possible. Well, we've got lots of stuff on if that's possible. Realism is something that is not necessarily a thing that we're looking for. Yeah, if the French rules don't make sense to you, well, that's that. But whatever rule set you're using, right? There's going to be parameters in which you must perform, right? Using these ideas to find those like little gamey things in a rule set generally is frowned upon because it generally takes away from match play, right, or the intended match play. So as long as you're not interfering with that intended match play, it's fine. If you're getting into a dueling situation, I don't know if trash talking is allowed or if talking is allowed during a match or whatever. Those will be things that will be particular to different things. Using arming, you know, either that way, you know, coming around engagement arming and all of that opens up a lot of strategic possibilities that you can do, that you can annoy, harass, and otherwise use some semblance of what you can call Form 7, right? But in our system, being not That's the best way to put that. You're not going to do Form 7, right? You can't do it. You can't do Form 6, right? That's something that's kind of internal to you, right? If you are a person who is at that level, then those things may occur, as it were. Yes, there's a loss of balance and spins for orchestra. Well, okay, so holding it on this offers you more reach. When people who don't like spin these things, a lot of times they will tend to hold it out here like this. It's not an uncommon thing, and even in kendo, they tend to. It's a lighter weapon, but so it's not necessarily uncommon to hold it back down there. It's just to do it out the other way. Now that too is illegal in ASL because just hold on to your sword right. That's what we would like. So it's going to lose a limb. It's the arming and the priority which prevents that. Occur when two people a bit so that people can watch, But there's so much time that happens in that. One or more persons, more often than double hits that we find two people start to arm at the same time and then both abandon the arming. They go, oh, okay, and then one will then immediately try to take priority or whatever. So we haven't necessarily had that much of a problem. Now in Duanbing, where we don't have that, we don't have priority, you can counterattack. We get far more doubles where two people hit at the same time because one or both of them were not necessarily defending when they should have. So, give and a take. You're either going to accept a bunch of doubles, there, or you're going to find some way to try to mitigate those from happening. Okay, so it looks like about it for the questions there. I can check the social media. Yeah, we've got, are there any physical techniques associated with this? Entirely psychological view at this point. There are no new techniques. You should have gone through all of your techniques, your physical techniques, by Form 5. And at this point, it's just modulation of those techniques. Was Vader using Form 7 when he was taunting Luke on Cloud City? Maybe. It depends on what you kind of want to read into it. The the forms were not invented when that scene was shot. So if you're looking for the motivation of that was intended in the scene, no, it was not. But you could make a case for it. Okay. And Papa and Juyo are different things. How? Kind of mentioned that. Not really sure. None of these particular techniques or whatever have a whole lot of explanation or fidelity even in the material. You're just kind of left up to these vague notions that these people did this. And again, they're more for building character and a story and narrative than they are in doing anything else. So that's what you got there. Yes, you could allow. You might be able to allow taunting, but again, when you're dealing with a sporting event, you don't necessarily want to encourage a whole lot of hostility between competitors, especially when you're dealing with a martial type of sport. because people are generally pretty amped up, and things can happen pretty quick, even in the most benign of circumstances. So, seems like lighting a match in a powder keg, but we are, we'll be doing this for one more week, so we got one more week of this, and then we're going to kind of transition into something else. We are still kind of locked down here in, into June, so I'll still be out here, kind of doing that, and will be available to this. Looking into when things, maybe even in June, starting up these classes on Zoom where we can stream and stuff like that, and we'll keep it small, maybe. But we'll experiment with those kinds of things. And so anyway, there. Yes. So I see we've got a bit of talk about rule sets and stuff like that. I would encourage you to go to the blog and read the stuff I've got up there, and we've got a couple of videos on rule sets here too. So that being said, I will release everybody into the world. Need a little bit of lunch myself. So everybody out there, stay healthy, stay happy. Keep active. Try to stay in it. Life is a little strange right now, but we will. It's not stopping. It's just changing. So keep on keeping on. All right. Practice, or I should say patience, practice, and perseverance. Happy sabering.